Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Alton. I'm glad you could join me. Today I have a really cool watch. It is a chronograph, a mecha quartz chronograph by MMI Watches out of Singapore. I think you're really going to like it. It has a big trick up its sleeve. So before us today, we have the Turret Marine Chronograph from MMI Watches Singapore. This is their third collection, and I think this is a really interesting offering by MMI. Let's talk about the specifications before we go any further, and then we'll get into the pros, the cons, and of course, a final summary. So the Turret has a 40 millimeter diameter case. It's 47 millimeters lug to lug. It has 22 millimeter lug width openings, and it's around 12.3 millimeters thick. It has a double domed sapphire crystal adding to a little bit of that thickness. Of course, it's 360L surgical grade stainless steel, as are most watches these days. The bezel is a 120 click unidirectional bezel. It's either ion plated or DLC gray stainless steel coated, depending upon the version that you choose. Has Swiss Super Luminova grade X1 and C3. The dial has an eggshell textured sandwich dial. The hands and indexes are filled with Swiss Super Luminova, and it has a very unique rotodate display complication, which we'll get into in a moment, but I really dig the way they have done this. The bracelet is 22 millimeters at the lugs, and then it goes down to 20 millimeters, and of course is also stainless steel with a quick release and a milled clasp with 5 micro adjustments and screw links. Now the movement in this bad boy is a Seiko hybrid mecha quartz movement, also known as the VK67A. It's a really great movement and a really practical movement, as you'll see in a few minutes. The water resistance is a fantastic 100 meters, but of course you don't want to push those buttons underwater. And it has a double dome sapphire crystal with 10 layers of anti-reflective coating on the underside. And it has a signed screw down crown, and that crown is loomed. I gotta say, I really like the loom on this watch. All right, let's begin by taking a closer look at the Turret Hybrid Chronograph. So there's a lot going on here, as you can tell. First of all, you have your screw down crown, which is signed over here. You have your pushers. They look like they're screw down, but they are not. We can give that a go and get it started. Stop it, reset it, snaps right back beautifully. Now you have your bezel. Your bezel is actually really hard to turn with gloves on. It goes up to 20 minutes with your minutes, and then of course after that it's every 5 minutes. Nice and smooth, everything lines up perfectly. The only way to make it a little easier to turn is to make it bigger and chunkier, but actually they've done the opposite. You'll see it actually sits into the case, and this is where the name turret comes from, being that it would be like the turret on a ship that kind of sinks into the hull. And so, although it's a little difficult to turn, I'm fine with that because of the aesthetics. I think it looks really cool, and I'm willing to give up on that, considering this isn't a dive watch. Now, it is a chronograph, so you'll find there is a tachymeter there on the rehaut. See it right there. Kind of difficult to see straight on, but it is there. And the reason that I think it's there in such a difficult fashion to see is because it needs to make room for that very clever date wheel. And so this isn't a Oris pointer date. It's sort of a spinner date, as you would. It's a disc that goes around, and I think it looks really cool. It's really effective. Obviously, it's in orange there at 23, the 23rd of December, just 2 more sleeps till Christmas morning. And it matches the seconds hand, and all of the subdials hands are also orange. All of the subdials hands are also loomed, which is pretty good. And I like that they tied in with Turret written in orange. And there's little markers around the dial as well with orange on them. And it's well balanced, well proportioned, it all fits together. Now, something you may not notice right off the bat is that the dial itself is actually sunken in around the outside, and the complications are also sunken in. See that? Kind of hard to catch. And so the main part of the dial is actually raised up above everything else, and then with the raised applied indices at the 5 minutes, it really does sort of give a lot of depth, a lot of detail to this watch. I really, really dig that. I think they worked really hard to make sure that this was all balanced and well proportioned. That had a lot of depth, a lot of interest. This is the kind of watch you keep sort of looking down at to find the time and forgetting to check out the time, because there's a lot going on and I really enjoy it. I like that there is a lot of white space here around the Turret logo, or the MMI logo, and the Turret and the chronograph. Printing is all kept in one location. I think that was a really good choice for this watch. So let's talk about the pros of this watch. Well, first of all, it's interesting. I think that all of the visual cues with the various elevations to the dial and the orange that is found throughout is very interesting. It's a very dynamic watch. And of course, that unique date system that they have employed is not just novel, but also functional and aesthetically pleasing, at least to me. I personally love a good pointer date, and this is sort of a different take on that. I quite enjoy that. The applied indices are very nice. Everything seems well proportioned, fits well. Another pro for me is the case. I really like this case. Now, it might look just a little slab-sided there, but it doesn't feel that way on the wrist. It's kind of squarish here, but then it slopes down at the lugs and is not only angular, but also multifaceted. Lots of different angles on this, which lend it a visual interest that I find very appealing. I also like the way the end link here, which is a female end link, meaning it's going to sit very nicely on the wrist. I like the way it rises up from the lugs. It adds a lot of dimension and interest to that. So the end link actually is just as interesting and just as well finished as the case and the lugs. And to be honest, a lot of watches just don't provide that for you. A lot of watches seem to have bracelets as an afterthought. And speaking of the bracelet, this is a really nice bracelet. It is an H-link bracelet. It's very comfortable, very well done. It's all brushed, which means it's going to stand up well to scuffs and whatnot. But it's a fine brushing that has a lot of light play, as you can see. The buckle's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. You've got your opening clasp here, which is very difficult to do with gloves on. There we go. And of course opens up, and you have yourself a pretty standard milled clasp, which I quite like. The case back is solid, which I have no problems with whatsoever. I don't really need to see this Seiko movement, as it is not a highlight. Obviously, the main highlight here is the case and the dial. Okay, another pro for me is the lume on this watch. You have to check this out. There is so much lume going on, it's crazy. The first time I saw that the date wheel was actually lumed, I was like, no way, that is so cool, so very cool. Maybe not so functional since you can't tell what day it actually is, but you know what? It's still pretty awesome indeed. The lume, I will say, in the hands and the markers doesn't last quite as long as the bezel. And the reason for that is, well, the hands are pretty thin. And so while it's applied really, really well, there's not a lot of real estate in which to apply it. Same with the markers. But that's okay. It is still glowing brightly at 6 a.m. in the morning, which is always my test for lume. Now, what are the cons for me? Well, to be honest, there aren't a whole lot of cons on this little watch. I can't find a ton wrong with it. A little bit difficult to move the bezel. Okay. Personally, I would have preferred to not have the faux screw down pushers here. I would rather they're either screw down or just simple pushers, but that's an aesthetic choice, and that's just for me. One note, and I'm being really picky here, would be that the end here of the clasp is kind of unfinished. It needs to be polished up. You can see right along here. So at this point, I'm sort of nitpicking. You've got screwed links and lots of adjustment points. You've got a functional watch. Now, I guess I should mention this in the pros, but I guess for me, the big thing about this is that this watch is actually really functional. A lot of chronographs have complications that don't really seem to help, like a 24-hour complication. Whoop-de-freaking-do. Who really cares? But this one here, it actually keeps track of 60 minutes at the top and then 12 hours here. So let's be honest, we're not always timing things for 30 minutes or 60 minutes. A lot of the times we can time things for 2 hours, 3 hours. So why not always include this complication? Well, that's because not every movement has that complication, and this particular one does. So kudos to them for this choice. So what are my final thoughts on this MMI turret? I think it's a great watch and a great value. In fact, it's the best chronograph I think I've come across all year. And taking a look out there at options in this price category, it competes with every single one of them. It's unique. It has a cool feature in that pointer date-ish type of date wheel. It is really well done and designed, especially in the case. It's well thought out in the dial. There's a lot going on, but it's still readable. I have a few quibbles, but really, I can't find a whole lot wrong with this watch. I think it's a fantastic watch. Now, they've just launched it, and they are fully funded, so you could order this with confidence. And I really think if this appeals to you, you can't go wrong with the turret. And I'm looking forward to seeing what else they do in the future. I want to thank you all for watching this video, and I'd like to thank MMI Watches Singapore for passing along this watch to me. It's a really great watch. It's one I don't really want to give back or send on to the next reviewer, but I will be doing so anyway. Well, thank you all for watching. I hope you have a very Merry Christmas if you celebrate. If you don't, I hope you have a happy holidays. I know the world's a little crazy out there right now. COVID is not a lot of fun at the moment, but let me just say, we're all in this together. We can all be kind to one another, show people mercy and grace. Well, thank you so much for watching. God bless. Have a great Christmas. Have a great holiday, and I'll see you in the next video in 2022.